pleased to be here with Rabbi Aryeh Bernstein, fifth generation Chicagoan.
Fifth generation Southsider.
Fifth generation Southsider. I'm a first generation Northside Chicago. Is a renowned educator, writer, editor, thinker, and we're privileged to have at Valley Beit Midrash.
Good to be here.
And I thought we'd talk just a little bit about the issue of slave reparations. There are great evils throughout history that continue to have implications still today. As we continue to face race issues in America today, the issue continues to emerge of, do we have a responsibility to the past in that regard?
Yeah.
What's your position on slave reparations?
Well, I'm glad you asked. I'm actually working on an article to publish in Jew School soon. It's been a very live question for me for a long time, and then really came to a head when Ta-Nehisi Coates, about a year and a half ago, wrote the spectacular article in the Atlantic on the case for reparations. And one of the things he, I think, most effectively talked about was the intensity of the insistence of people, especially white people, but a lot of black people too, to dismiss the whole idea out of hand as not worthy of consideration, to consider it as a joke, and that what's lingering beneath that nervous laughter. And for myself, I started thinking, like, what does it mean as a Jew, or more specifically as what we like to say as a ben or bat Torah, like somebody who really engages with Torah and tries to live based on Torah. Our entire religious identity is predicated on the justice, at least in our case, of slavery reparations. So in Exodus 12, when the Exodus is actually narrated, like after the killing of the firstborn and everything, the Israelites go in that condition of duress, and they ask for lots of gear, gold, silver, and clothing from the Egyptians, and vayashilum v'yanatzlu b'nei Yisrael Mitzrayim. So they lent to them, and in so doing, the Israelites emptied out v'yanatzlu the Egyptians. The Aramaic translation renders that roken, like they emptied them out. And there's some nervousness among some of the commentaries, like, was this justified or not? Because, like, did they borrow, assuming they get it? But we'll get to that, the question of justification. But, like, on a divine level, it's clearly justified, and it's very clear from the context that this wasn't just the Israelites did this and that was going overboard, like some, like Shimon and Levi were justified rescuing Dinah, and they went overboard killing everybody. It wasn't that, because in the very previous chapter 11, God explicitly commands Moshe, don't forget, it's not just going free, you have to take their stuff too. And back in chapter 3 at the burning bush, when Moshe first got his call, God sets out what's going to happen, says, and by the way, and then when you leave, you have to take stuff from the Egyptians. And even back 400 years earlier, Abraham, chapter 15 of Genesis, at the covenant between the pieces, the Brit Ben Avitarim, God said, like, it's going to be dark. Your descendants are going to be pulled into slavery, but they're going to leave very wealthy with lots of gear. So it's really worked into our memory of our own liberation. And that the liberation, to be liberation, had to involve getting lots of stuff from the Egyptians. Now, the question is, how do we interpret the nature of what that stuff is? So maybe you could argue philosophy of law, was this reparations, is it not? Was it just plundering? Maybe plundering was justified, what to make of that? The Gemara, at least one Gemara, thinks that they were reparations. There's a story in Sanhedrin, page 91, Taftzadi Aleph, in which there's like a disputation between Alexander the Great and in the time of Alexander the Great, a disputation. The Egyptians come before him, and they've been looking into the Torah. The Torah has just been translated to Greek, and they find the verse, chapter 12 of Exodus, that the Israelites emptied out their Egyptian ancestors, and they say, hey, we need reparations from the Israelites. They have to pay us back for all the stuff they stole. And Alexander the Great turns to the Jews and says, what do you got to say about that? The first Jewish lawyer comes forward, a guy named Gavia ben Pasisa, not a rabbi, comes forward and says to the rabbis, all right, let me go and dispute this. If I lose, then you can discredit me by saying he's not really one of the rabbis. But if I win, then even a commoner is able to win. So he goes in and he makes the argument, says, all right, Egyptians, you want to argue from our Torah? All right, well, look at this verse. 430 years they served as slaves in Egypt. Where are wages for all that time? And the Egyptians don't have a response. So our tradition, at least, understood all those verses as being slavery reparations. If they're not going to come through, a peace and reconciliation commission and government settlements, go take it ahead of time. And it's like our entire system of biblical worship. Like the Mishkan was built with all that gold and silver.
Now the gap between biblical tradition and everything between.
Right.
I mean, if we look at Jewish ethics of the last thousands of years or Jewish law of the last thousands of years, how do you think that addresses this issue? Because we tend not to be a people who just look at Chumash, look at Bible, and build our theology or philosophy.
Right. So again, the explicit statement that the economic way to understand what this money, this gear was in the Gemara. So, which is more of the building blocks. The Gemara says this was the best we could do to get our wages coming forth. The Gemara also emphasizes that I think in Brachot, every Israelite came out with 10 Libyan donkeys laden with gold and silver. It was a lot of gear. And it's the Gemara that also recognizes, one of the objections to reparations, even to discussing reparations, is but if you just shower people with lots of money, then they're going to do bad stuff with it. And our tradition recognizes that. It says we built the Mishkan with all this gear. We also built the golden calf with it. And there's a Gemara, I think also in Brachot, that interprets the phrase Dizahav, which was one of the locales mentioned in the journey. That there was a place in which an argument was made that enough of the gold, because the gold was used for, God got mad at us for building a golden calf with the gold that was given to us as reparations. And the Israelites argued back, that's on you. You brought us into slavery, it brought us into this whole condition, and there's going to be a volatile period, but this belongs to them. It's their due. And we, it's not just us going back and doing Bible scholarship now. That passage of God speaking to Avram at the covenant between the pieces and saying that your people are going to come out with riches from Egypt, and they're not going to come out as post-slavery stragglers. They're going to come out taken care of. We say that in the Haggadah every year. We don't, and not just referring to the verse, but we turn that into a blessing. Baruch Shomer Havtachato Yisrael. We praise God for keeping the promise and cite that. So, our seders every year are a ritualization over our well-laden table with our finest silver, eating a celebratory meal, celebrating our freedom and singing freedom songs. Part of that is that, part of the freedom story isn't just that the yoke of slavery was lifted, but that we came out taken care of for it, that we got back wages for all that work. We built the Egyptian economy, and we had our economy built up as a result.
I think the parallel is so obvious that we have to confront. So getting to practicalities, who are the people that you think should receive these reparations? Is it all Black Americans? Is it those who can prove they're descendants of slaves? And who do you think should ultimately pay this?
Yeah, so I think it's a great question. And I actually take a sort of wait and see approach to that. I feel like a lot of what happens in discussions about reparations in the United States is so premature. People putting the cart before the horse in order to shut down the discussion. They can't imagine how it would work. And so they shut down the whole conversation. I suspect that part of the reason people can't understand how it would work is because the amount of the plunder and theft is so gargantuan. So let's get to work on it. The upshot of Coates' article, which has been dismissed by lots of people who didn't really read it carefully and just heard the case for reparations. Oh, there goes some crazy person again about that. But his upshot is, I don't know exactly how it would work. I don't know whether it would work. Congressman John Conyers from Michigan has submitted a resolution to the House of Representatives every year for, I don't know, 15 years, 20 years, something like that, that there be a congressional committee to study the issue.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm not an expert on economics or history or family plans. I'm also not an expert on the modern history of reparations.
Mm-hmm.
Other countries in the world have dealt with them. South Africa has, other places have dealt with it. Let there be a committee in Congress with government-paid staff people doing what all
Mm-hmm.
congressional committees do to research it. And I, as an interested citizen, will follow that with interest, and maybe I'll have an opinion based on that. I don't know. The best thing, like right now, we have a whole complicit society. Part of what the Torah is telling us with this, like the story of our own claiming of reparations that would not have come to us by a congressional committee, was that we just went and took stuff from whichever Egyptians we could, from the neighbors. And yeah, I mean, maybe ultimately they should have gone into the Treasury Department.
Mm-hmm.
It's not the way it works,
Yeah.
you know? So I sort of feel like if we do it in the right way, then it'll happen in the right way. If not, I mean, any Jew, probably any Christian, I mean, they're recipients of the Bible too, like, has no basis to oppose black people taking what's theirs from wherever they can get it. I don't want to get to that because I'm not. I think the way we got our reparations in Egypt was not very good. It would have been much better for Pharaoh to be writing a check and for it to be managed through Moshe and Miriam and Aharon, like actually, distributing it in a fair way. What some Hebrews might have been next door neighbors of wealthier Egyptians than other Hebrews, and like, so why should some have come out better than others?
Yeah. So let me a last question. So I hear you being compelled by our Jewish tradition.
Right.
I hear you feeling a mandate from the actual events of American slavery.
Yeah.
What compels you from 21st century? What compels you from the contemporary experience to want to put some immediacy on this?
So, it's, well, first of all, it's immediate because, again, this isn't old Bible stuff. I go to the Seder every single year. Right. That's immediate. Like every religious thing I do, I say Zecher L'Tziat Mitzrayim. That's the memory of Egypt. So like our whole tradition is invested in telling us that is not old stuff. That is immediate. It's right now. So that's number one. I just want to defend the tradition. It's not being the tradition.
Good.
It's immediate.
I hear that.
Secondly, it's that you can argue whether, in terms of the invasion of body, whether slavery is even ended. It got replaced with Jim Crow, and now it's replaced with the incarceration state, where privately owned plantations are incarcerating mainly black people. So it's like, but even putting that aside, even if you want to say that the yoke of slavery, part of slavery, long ago ended, the economic aspect really hasn't so much. And so where my people are from, on the south side of Chicago, on the west side of Chicago, has been a great example of this. I mean, a big part of Coates's article was really doing research on the economics of the way closure of credit options to African Americans and contract buying, redlining, like conspired to, according to the estimates of housing attorney Mark Satter back in the 60s when he was representing exploited black people in housing markets, he was estimating that $1 million a day was being stolen from the black community through the credit and housing markets. At that time, there's a lot of money in the black community. At that time, there were good jobs in America, in Chicago, in the north, in industrial cities, in America in general, before they were all outsourced. And but because the housing market was closed, the housing market was a way in which white America, or at least parts of small slices of white America, took that money back and redistributed that among white people. Yeah. So, I don't think when I say slavery reparations, I'm not saying that they need to end with 1865. Right. I think that should be studied. I don't know, and I'd also want to see like international history on this. I'm saying that in terms of contemporary American justice, there is a very, very potent question to be asked, and the question is more one of how and precisely what than whether. And at least, I think the Jewish community, if we mean anything at all when we're having our seders,
Mhm.
or every time we make kiddush and we recall the Exodus from Egypt, or any of the other
Mhm.
religious things we do recalling the Exodus from Egypt, if we're not completely full of it when we say that,
Mhm.
it should be a slam dunk political issue that this is a Jewish religious cause, that we think this is a legitimate claim. If not, if we don't think it's a legitimate claim that there is what to investigate for reparations to try to figure it out, then I think, minimally we should all be skipping reading Parsha Kitisa and Parsha Truma, like everything about the construction of the Mishkan, and much more beyond that.
Right. So there we have it. A sense that Jewish values, Jewish tradition compel us, that the contemporary situation compels us, that the living tradition continues to compel us, and yet there's these obstacles to look at race issues in America, to continue to, for some reason, for Americans and American Jews, to continue to look and take responsibility for our past, not so distant past. And yet Jews are not yet at the front line of this issue, and we ought to be, and we're placed.
And in fairness, very few black people are at the front line. It's like Congressman Conyers and a few other activists, and I think that Coates in his article writes very potently about the nervous laughter that accompanies any conversation about this. People are like, ha ha ha, reparations, isn't that ridiculous? Why is that ridiculous? It's actually because it's so obvious that people have to make it into a joke. So I think Coates's writing, his very poignant writing, and other people have been writing on it, should raise the stature of this. And I think as a Jewish community, we should be writing to our representatives in the House and saying, as Jews, it's unconscionable that Congressman Conyers' proposal, was House Resolution 520 or something like that, I forget the number of it, but your representative should know what it is. Write to your representative and say, as a Jew, it is imperative for us to support Congressman Conyers' resolution for there to be a serious study of the issue of reparations.
And if we feel some tension or opposition to this, we should do some inner work on the social and psychological tensions that lead us to wanting to dismiss writing this into the form of justice. And to work through those obstacles that are heavy and heavily laden with issues of power and privilege. So there it is. Rabbi Aryeh Bernstein, one way you continue to follow him as one of the senior editors of Jew School, interesting blog online, and other ways as well. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.